Finally, we can breathe a sigh of relief, but for how long? The relentless 2020 hurricane season comes to a screeching halt with no new name systems and no new development expected for 5 whole days. We're live to answer your questions in a Meteorologist Q&A live here on Track in the Tropics. Hey there, everybody. JB Buno here with you live. And actually, I have to change my name up there in the top right-hand portion of your screen. Being joined by meteorologist Amanda Holly and, of course, KVEO Chief Meteorologist Isaac Williams here to break down the latest with Beta. You see Beta there on our screen. We're going to get the very latest from meteorologist Amanda Holly. Hey there, Amanda.
It's a welcome relief for sure, JB. For the first time since September 7th, we are not tracking any new development over the next 5 days. Now, we are still tracking the remnants of Beta, which are currently moving into Louisiana, and the remnants of Teddy as well. Teddy is now a post-tropical cyclone, still bringing some pretty strong winds, some larger seas to Nova Scotia, but again, they are post-tropical, so they no longer have those tropical characteristics. So it is safe to say that there are no current tropical systems out there, and there's no new development expected over the next 5 days as well. So that's some great news, but let's talk about Beta for a little bit, because we do still have impacts being felt from the remnants of Beta, and you can see all of that rain over the past 6 hours, kind of still the circulation there as well. A lot of heavy rain moving through central Louisiana, but now out of Texas, where they received the highest report there of up to 14 inches of rain just outside of, I believe, of the Houston area. So, this was a big system that kind of moved in. It was a slow-moving system, so we talked about a lot of rainfall with this system, not necessarily some extremely strong winds, although they did see those tropical storm force winds as well. But I do want to bring in Isaac here because, you are in Texas. You didn't necessarily see any direct impacts from Beta, but you were definitely closer to the activity than we were here in the Tampa Bay area.
Yeah, we were gearing up. I think last Thursday we had kind of a prelim schedule for the weekend of kind of really tracking it, because at first it looked like it was going to kind of come to South Texas and it would be our second hit. We had Hannah earlier this season. But again, as you mentioned, it kind of changed its course and went north. We still had some pretty significant beach erosion here on South Padre Island because it was so slow moving, and it was able to just kind of push, for lack of a better term, just a wall of water. It doesn't take much for that island either. It's only about 2 feet or so above sea level, and we had 2 to 3 feet of storm surge over the course of a couple of days. So we did see some beach erosion. I actually posted some pictures yesterday, and it was pretty intense. We had coastal flood warnings down here, but certainly nothing like what the Houston Metro saw. Of course, you mentioned this, but some spots over a foot of rain being seen up there. Thankfully, as it kind of made its final approach to the Texas coast, it was kind of eaten away at intensity by drier air, really kind of surrounding the system. So I think that's what kind of helped it not strengthen to a hurricane. I believe the strongest it got was about 60 miles per hour when it was still offshore. But when it made landfall, the winds were just 45. So we can be very thankful that it was a weak tropical storm by wind definition, even though the coastal flooding was still intense.
Yeah, those slow-moving systems, they really do some damage on their own, even if they are on the weaker side. Now, we are still looking at some pretty good, decent rainfall there through Louisiana into Mississippi and even through the Tennessee Valley over the next 3 days. You can see upwards of 6 inches, maybe even localized higher amounts than that, 7 to 10 inches, especially in northern Mississippi. So we'll be watching for that. There are some flash flood watches and warnings in effect currently. Those are flashing boxes, still dealing with the river flooding there in the panhandle of Florida, and that was from Sally a couple weeks ago. So, the rain, we're not done with the system just yet, even though it's no longer tropical. Now, let's talk about Teddy for a second here as well. Those maximum winds still at 60 miles per hour. So, again, it's post-tropical. It doesn't have that warm core anymore, but it's still bringing some tropical-like conditions to Nova Scotia, but not really necessarily to the United States, at least direct impacts. You can see, though, the wave heights the last 22 hours, they are still pretty significant, especially along the east coast of the United States. So those large swells continue to propagate outward from the system, and we're still looking at 9 to 11 feet of those wave heights offshore of the east coast of Florida and even all the way up through the New England states. So those will start to die down as Teddy continues to move north and away from the Atlantic. But that was a significant storm there, Isaac. I mean, we watched it for a long time. It did impact Bermuda, but otherwise it was a fish storm, which is good news because it did reach Category 4 strength.
Yeah, and pretty quickly once it got its act together. It started just off the coast of Africa, and so it was a very long track system too. I think the highest buoy report that I saw was 42 feet storm or waves out there in the open waters. And, I hope all the ships got out of the way of the fish storm there, because we can be very thankful it didn't change its course, because, Bermuda saw Paulette just a couple of weeks ago, and then it decided to come back to life for a day or two. Paulette did. Thankfully, again, it kind of died for the second time. So, yeah, we're down to 0.
We're down to 0 with the named storms. Of course, we know, though, that we're not done just yet. We're still looking at pretty much the entire Atlantic basin for potential development. As we get into October, that area kind of shrinks a little bit, gets a little closer to home as we watch the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, and off the east coast of the United States. But, we've racked in a lot of numbers so far. I wanted to kind of do a little bit of a recap just to show you we've had 23 named storms, 8 of those being hurricanes and 2 of those being major hurricanes. And you can see the forecast that we got, the updated forecast from August. We're very close to those numbers. We are currently in that margin of named storms from NOAA. So I imagine as we head into October, we're not done just yet. Of course, we've used all of our alphabet names. We used all 21 of those, and now we are in the Greek alphabet. We've used Alpha and Beta already, and I imagine we're going to add a few more. Zeta, you see there, has an asterisk. That's what we got to in 2005, the only other time that we've used the Greek alphabet. So we'll be watching as we head into the rest of September here and October, just because we don't have any new named storms expected over the next 5 days doesn't mean we're done just yet.
I for one, hoping that we never see Gamma, though. If anything is going to stay on par with 2020, of course, we're going to get Gamma and Delta and Epsilon and Zeta. But again, tracking the tropics here every Wednesday afternoon to keep you posted on all tropical development. We're now going to open up everybody a Meteorologist Q&A. We're going to take only a few questions here because we know that with the tropics being as quiet as they are, we don't have as large of an audience here online. Most people, of course, tuning in to find out what's going on with named systems out there in the Atlantic basin, but with no new named systems there and, of course, no new development expected for 5 days, we don't have as large of an audience, but that doesn't mean we're not going to take your questions. Use the hashtag HeyJB. Hashtag Hey Amanda, hashtag Hey Isaac. We'll be looking for your comments on the Facebook Live comment sections of our respective television stations across the southeastern United States. And if we see any of those comments, we'll pluck them out of Facebook Live, throw them up on screen, and pose them to the 2 experts here, Amanda Holly and KVEO Chief Meteorologist Isaac Williams. I'll start things off. Maybe a hashtag Hey JB sort of question here for both of you. How rare is it for September for it to be this quiet, and for us to have all the named storms, such a busy map this time a week ago, and now no new development expected for 5 days? Amanda, maybe we'll start with you here, and then I want to hear Isaac's perspective. But how rare is this for September?
It's not uncommon for us to see no new development in the next 5 days during the month of September. It's a little more unusual for 2020 just because we've been tracking so many named storms, and it feels like a very constant that we're doing these Tracking the Tropics. I was just thinking, that we've more than likely had more unscheduled episodes of Tracking the Tropics than our regularly scheduled Wednesday programs. So, we've certainly had a lot of activity this year. A lot of those storms, though, especially at the beginning of the season, were on the weaker side. They never really impacted land. They were very short-lived storms. But, it's not uncommon, especially at the beginning of September. But, this is a little bit busier of a time. It's just seems a little bit more unusual, I guess, because we've been seeing so many named storms this year. Isaac?
Yeah, Amanda, you said it well. Averages, you smooth things out. More times than not, we are going to have something active in the month of September, and we can just be thankful right now that we don't. Just last Friday, there were 3 storms named in the same day. And even though 2 of those died pretty quickly, per se, it just, everybody just kind of being super hyper aware of the tropics this year. I just think everybody can just breathe a collective sigh of relief, get into a weekend for the first time in weeks that we don't have at least something out there worrying somebody.
Right. No new development and no, storms pending heading our way. So, yeah, just a couple of days here of some relief, but, we're not done just yet.
All right, we got our first few questions that are coming in here. One here from Jaden Effenberger. I don't know if this is true or not, but again, that's why we have the meteorologists here on Tracking the Tropics to answer questions just like this one. Hashtag AJB. I know it's far out, but the GFS, Euro, and a few other models are showing a storm from the Caribbean around October 6th. That's well out into the future here. What do we say here to Jaden, Amanda?
Well, I'm watching that date because I have a vacation coming up. So, of course, I'm looking at the longer range
We all need
models.
vacation days, right? We all need to get some off time.
Right. But, it is a little bit far out. There are still a lot of changes that can happen. And I will say from run to run, there are big changes with that potential system. But I have seen it, too, on all of the longer range models. Every other run or so, there is a storm that kind of develops in the Western Caribbean and kind of moves north. So, but it's not every single run, which tells us there's not consistency and we don't have high confidence on that scenario just yet.
I want to get to this next question here from Richard Barons III, #AJB. What is the farthest north has a September storm that has formed? Any storms that have come from as far north than Africa? And I'm not sure. Maybe Amanda, maybe you can help me decipher what Richard is talking about here. But when I first read the question, I thought that this basically meant how far north has the storm formed. Let's say, towards the United States. And of course, Superstorm Sandy was late October into early November there. So we are not out of the worst of what we could see in the 2020 hurricane season yet. But Amanda, Isaac, you want to hop in here?
Yeah, I'm going to say I don't know the exact answer to that question, how far north a storm has formed. But obviously with Teddy, it turned post-tropical, I believe, either this morning or late last night. And it was still a tropical system all the way up toward Nova Scotia.
Yeah, I agree. I really don't know either. I know that Teddy survived pretty far north.
Yeah.
I know that it was fairly rare to see that part of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland actually in a tropical storm warning from the Canadian equivalent of the National Hurricane Center. So let's just go with Teddy. That's our safe answer for now.
And those storms can stay powerful even if they become post-tropical that far north, because then they just lose their tropical characteristics. They just lose that warm core, but they can stay strong systems with those really strong winds.
Next question.
Yeah, and even before it kind of transitioned, if you will, the tropical storm force winds were out, I believe, 550 miles from the center. So that just goes to show you how huge. I think the Hurricane Center actually used ginormous.
Ginormous, okay.
I think that wasn't that added as an official word by Merriam-Webster. I'm trying to remember here, everybody. Ginormous. I think it actually was.
Okay.
Again, combining gigantic and enormous. Ginormous. Great word. Again, as we continue to take your questions here on Tracking the Tropics, the next one coming in here from Shelly Roland Thompson from WKRG's Facebook page in Mobile, #AJB. What about the first week of October? And I think, Amanda, you might not be the only one targeting the first week of October for a potential break, a potential vacation. Amanda, Isaac, you want to hop in here?
I'll let Isaac take this one.
Yeah, so first week of October, still kind of on that downward trend of a pretty active September. But as we know, plenty of storms can form in the month of October. We had Wilma in 2005. So not out of the woods yet, just because we're off of that peak month of September. And once we get into the month of October, we typically start to see a little bit more development in the Caribbean Sea versus the Atlantic, even though, for the rest of September and about the first week or so of October, everyone's fair game. And then really the last 2/3 of October, we'll start to watch for the Caribbean to maybe have a couple of more systems. But hopefully this trend holds for more than 5 days, and we can at least get into the first couple of days of October without any signs of development. But given how this season has went, I don't know if I'd put a lot of stock in the calm weather sticking around for too much longer.
Next question. I love this question coming in here because with the tropics being quiet, we can start to have conversations that aren't hyper-focused on a particular system. But we can actually just have a little bit more of a loose conversation about tropical development, about the history of hurricanes. There's so much that we can talk about, and I love this question. I don't think we've ever received this question before on Tracking the Tropics. Brenda Campbell on WFLA's Facebook page asking, #Hey Amanda, #HeyJB, #Hey Isaac, has there ever been the perfect storm? And of course, I don't know if Brenda is referencing this directly, but there was the famous 2000 movie with George Clooney and Mark Wahlberg and many, many others, a great movie about, of course, the perfect storm. But to answer the question, Amanda, what do we say here to Brenda?
I guess it kind of just depends on the characteristics.
What you define as a perfect storm, right?
Yeah, the perfect storm to me would be no storm.
Correct.
But then we look at systems like Teddy that was, really well defined on satellite. It looked great from a meteorological perspective. It had a really nice, well-defined eye, and it was very symmetrical. And we see those storms, especially out in the Atlantic more often than making landfall. But we also had Hurricane Michael that made landfall as a Category 5 storm, and that storm also looked great from a meteorological perspective in terms of the satellite. It was very symmetrical. It had that really well-defined eye. Irma, another example that, kind of lived for a very long time. And again, I guess depends on your definition of the perfect storm. Isaac?
Yeah, I would agree. From a meteorological perspective, Patricia in the Eastern Pacific, the strongest wind speed, 200 miles per hour. And then I think the movie, correct me if I'm wrong, Perfect Storm was modeled after Grace in 91 or 90. I think that's what they said in the movie. I read that somewhere. So again, it's all up to interpretation, but all the storms you mentioned from a meteorological perspective and just kind of a textbook perspective, every single storm had that textbook look. So
next question will be the final question that we're taking here on Tracking the Tropics. It comes from WCBD's Facebook page in South Carolina. Shayna Hurst Hunt, hashtag Hey Amanda. Is there anything towards Africa coming maybe in 6+ days? So, of course, looking out into the future here and trying to get an ideas, even anything out there that we need to keep an eye on, Amanda?
That's a great question, Shayna. We don't have any new development expected in the next 5 days, which I assume is why you asked in the next 6+ days. The good news is if anything comes off Africa, at least we have at least about 10 days before those systems would impact the United States. So it doesn't look like anything currently is coming off the coast of Africa that we are watching. And then, of course, we'll continue to get later into October. But like I said, as we get into October and you have the map up there, we start to look a little closer to home in that Western Caribbean area for development in the Gulf of Mexico. And then you can kind of see those prevailing tracks, those arrows, and that's kind of the direction that they start to head. So we'll continue to watch it. But to answer your question, no, nothing expected really in the next 6 to maybe 8 days for you.
Isaac, before we say farewell, I'm sure that you would hope that Brownsville, Texas, that Southern Texas has seen the last of 2020 hurricane season. Your final thoughts here?
Yeah, I like those arrows on the map away from South
away
Texas.
From Texas.
That's what we like to see here. But, Gulf Caribbean, anytime something forms, it's basically in our backyard. Everybody is kind of glued to their screens, kind of watching the next system. And we had a lot of eyes on our, web pages and social media and newscasts last week with Beta. So, fingers crossed, as JB, you mentioned, we stay away from South Texas and we have our one and done storm in Hannah, and hopefully we don't see any more.
Again, I'd like to thank KVEO Chief Meteorologist Isaac Williams, who's, of course, been talking a whole lot about Beta here over the last week or so, and also being joined, of course, by Tracking the Tropics meteorologist Amanda Holly here in your hurricane headquarters. Thanks so much for being with us here for this Meteorologist Q&A. For all the questions that we missed, and I know that we missed a bunch, we'll, of course, be back next Wednesday, 2 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Central, our normal streaming time, unless we might pop up even earlier than that if there's any tropical development worth going live for. So, of course, we'll keep an eye here on the Atlantic Basin. As you see there in the big white text, no new development expected for 5 days. That's welcome relief for us here in the United States, but we'll continue to, of course, to keep an eye on satellite and on all the advisories from the National Hurricane Center here in your hurricane headquarters. For Isaac Williams, Amanda Holly, I'm JB Buno. Thanks so much for being with us. We'll see you next time on Tracking the Tropics.
Thank you for watching Tracking the Tropics.